All right. Well, good morning again, everyone. Thank you. Everyone seems to be in such a good mood this morning. I think hopefully you're enjoying the last bit of summer before heading back to school. I know that's coming up for a lot of teachers, especially soon. My district is starting back on August 10th this year, so it's pretty early. It seems like it feels super early, but we're really glad you're here. And thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be diving into organisms and the environment. And this was supposed to be the last in our series, but of course we ended up missing a day due to technical issues. And so that last session for the summer workshop series is actually going to be on Monday. That's when we will do reporting category 2, force energy and force and energy, and then that'll be the same time, 9 a.m. on Monday the 31st. So we're going to kind of dive right in, get started. As we get going, please remember, feel free, this is a pretty small group. We've spent a lot of time together, most of us this summer, so I feel like we've gotten to know each other pretty well. Feel free to come off mute if you have questions, put the questions in the chat. Gina, my lovely coworker in Austin, will be sure and monitor the chat. And so if you have any questions, input, comments, we want to make this as collaborative as possible to make sure we're helping each other out. So with that said, today we're going to be doing a 5E dive into the new standards. So I'm trying to structure the actual learning of the new TEKS in a way that shows you also how to structure like a 5E lesson cycle. And so for the first hour or so, we're going to use we're going to go through the first 4 of the E's. I'm not actually going to make anyone take a test at the end, no evaluate, although hopefully you'll put in your evaluations for the presentation so that we can always make things better. But so we're going to start with our engage, work through the explore and explain, and we'll take a nice little break, and then we'll go through kind of an elaborate where you go into breakout sessions and share. So I think organisms in the environment is one of those. There's not necessarily a ton of new material. Like last week, we talked about Earth and space, and it's like, holy cow, hair on fire, everything's changing. This one, while there's a lot of reshuffling, most of it is stuff that is already taught somewhere within our curriculum. So it's going to be a lot of sharing with teachers in different grade levels. So that's good news for the most part. Hopefully we'll have you out of here by noon at the very latest. Today, actually, again, because most of it's not completely new material, maybe we'll try and get out just a little bit early. So here we go. Reporting category 4, organisms in the environment. I'll say this I taught most of my career in 7th grade, 7th grade science, and then I also taught STEM. So for me, organisms in the environment is like coming home. This is my comfort zone, because as a 7th grade teacher, that's mostly what we taught was life science. So this is one of those that is 7th grade teachers are going to be able to take a deep breath on when you see, because we're going to take out a ton of stuff from the 7th grade curriculum. Over the last several weeks, we've talked about all the stuff we're adding to 7th grade especially, and this time we're finally taking some stuff out. So we're going to start with our anchoring phenomenon, and this is a fascinating little video on cordyceps. So I have it already pulled up, and oh, you know what? Let me make sure I am sharing my sound. All right, cordyceps.
Incredibly, 80% of all insects live in jungles. Few are more successful than the ants. There can be 8 million individuals in a single hectare. But jungle ants don't have it all their own way. These bullet ants are showing some worrying symptoms. Spores from a parasitic fungus called cordyceps have infiltrated their bodies and their minds. Its infected brain directs this ant upwards. Then, utterly disorientated, it grips a stem with its mandibles. Those afflicted that are discovered by the workers are quickly taken away and dumped far away from the colony. It seems extreme, but this is the reason why. Like something out of science fiction, the fruiting body of the cordyceps erupts from the ant's head. It can take 3 weeks to grow, and when finished, the deadly spores will burst from its tip. Then any ant in the vicinity will be in serious risk of death. The fungus is so virulent it can wipe out whole colonies of ants. And it's not just ants that fall victim to this killer. There are literally thousands of different types of cordyceps fungi, and remarkably, each specializes on just one species. But these attacks do have a positive effect on the jungle's diversity, since parasites like these stop any one group of animal getting the upper hand. The more numerous a species becomes, the more likely it will be attacked by its nemesis, a cordyceps fungus.
Monday.com makes scans.
All right, so cordyceps, kind of a scary thing there from the current slide. And oh yes, kids absolutely freaking out over this video. What other connections can you see that cordyceps, the video on cordyceps with fungus bursting out of insects' heads. What other kind of connections can you see? Where might we want to use this? What do you notice or observe about this anchoring phenomenon video? And I'll give you time to either come off mute or feel free to type it in the chat. Anything you notice or anywhere you would make a connection to your content with a video like this.
I would use this in teaching predation for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, predation's a big part of that. Oh, symbiosis, ecosystems, yeah, parasitism, interdependency. Ooh, decomposing, that cycling of matter. That's a good one too.
One other thing I found interesting was the animal behavior. When the ant was infected, they immediately carried it far away from the mound. And at first I was like, that's interesting. Why would they do that? And then when I actually saw it grow, and I was like, oh, yep, I get it now.
That's why. And the spores going everywhere. Yeah. Awesome. Great insights. And just one more little noticing. Yeah, the kids would definitely freak out over this. If you have seen the show called The Last of Us, it is the latest amazing zombie movie or zombie series that has come out, and it is based on the idea that cordyceps make the leap to humans. So the parasite, the fungus in the zombie movie is actually real, and the kids probably would be able to make that connection because even if they're younger and shouldn't be watching that stuff, a lot of them have seen that. It's very popular right now. So it's something in their world and in their scope that they would be able to relate to. So cordyceps are real. Oh my gosh, who knew they could turn organisms into zombies? And you can kind of see that again, that behavior, like you were saying, where they it actually takes over and controls their brain to the point that they go to a specific high location where their spores will have the most opportunity to spread. And then they have the ant grab onto the stem, and then they kill the ant through taking over and using its nutrients to grow itself and then spread more spores. So it's actually really fascinating what this horrible fungus can do. However, I hope you also noticed at the end, it came back to there is some benefit to what this organism is doing. So yes, this fungi can wipe out whole colonies of ants or any specific organism, but there's a benefit to that, and that benefit is in the checks and balances. So it keeps the ants from getting too numerous, or it keeps whatever species from getting too numerous. So the reason I chose this particular, there was so many options, but I chose this particular one not only because it has amazing connections to popular culture and so many different aspects of like the interactions in a food web or a food chain, the cycling of matter, all of that, but also because it shows that there's a shift from just looking at, oh my gosh, that's horrible, that fungus should be wiped out, to, you know what, there's a reason for it. There's a balance to it. There's a benefit to it. And you'll see throughout the new standards, as we start with these 2024 standards, that there is a bigger focus on interconnectedness and the cause and effect relationship between why would that fungus be doing that and the benefits of it and all of that. So it really is looking at kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, even though the fungus is absolutely shocking. And it will, you like you said, you can hear your kids reacting when that little fungus starts growing out of the ant's head. I've actually showed this in my classroom, and the kids are like, oh, wow, they just go nuts. And so they're obviously highly engaged at that point, and I can use this throughout my unit and keep coming back to it and keep coming back to it. And there's just a lot of places to anchor on with this. Credit here goes to the Wonder of Science, Mr. Anderson. If y'all know him, I've heard of him. He is amazing, and his website, thewonderofscience.com, has awesome anchoring phenomenons. Now, they are specifically geared for NGSS, not Texas standards. So a lot of the material there is great, but it is NGSS. So just that little caveat. However, there are anchoring phenomenon for every NGSS standards, and there's a lot of correlation between those standards and the new Texas standards. So great place to go and look and find some anchoring phenomenon. So with that said, we are going to go ahead and dive in to the new standards. And the best way to do this is to allow you to explore these standards yourself before we kind of talk through them. So I'm going to share the link in the chat. Anyone with the link can edit. And what we have created here is an alignment activity. With this alignment activity, we've taken the current TEKS, the 2017 streamlined TEKS that we are currently using in science, and will be using next year, right? They're not changing until 2024. We are getting a jump on this to start working towards it and take some of that pressure of implementing the new TEKS off. So the current TEKS are in blue. The new TEKS, the 2024 TEKS, are in green. It will be easiest to work in columns. So what we've done is take each standard, and I'm going to try and match it up with the old standard. So this one is identify and record changes from seed, seedling, plant, flower, and fruit in a simple plant life cycle. So we're going to see if we can find something that in the old TEKS would match that, and just kind of sort them into one column would be blue, One column would be green. If something doesn't match at all, like this is a new standard, I might just stick it way off to the side so it shows that it is a brand new standard. So you can find there's one for each grade level. You can find your grade level. I did not include one for biology. We are going to be talking about the changes in biology, but obviously that would be the entire scope and sequence for that year-long course. So I didn't include one of these for biology, but we will, if you're a biology teacher, I got you covered. We will be talking about the changes that affect you. So we'll give you about 10 minutes or so to really get in and see how these match up. Please feel free to do this collaboratively. If you want to talk about some of the changes you're seeing, you're welcome to do so. Definitely want to go in and see the other grade levels as well. So if you're finished with your specific grade level and are looking at those standards, go into maybe the one grade level below or above. And that way you kind of get a view of that vertical alignment piece. We will talk more about vertical alignment as we go. All right, I still see lots and lots of moving around standards, trying to match them up, trying to figure out what aligns and what doesn't to our current standards. So great job. Does anyone notice any kind of overall trends that you're seeing? Any kind of large observations as you're going through this activity? Big change there from 7th grade, a lot of that material shifting up to 8th grade. 1st grade changing to take out a lot of plants. All right, so we'll take just a few more minutes to kind of finish up and then maybe take an overall view of this. Yeah. There's big changes going on with between plants and animals for sure. I know I'm going to be interested to see how it plays out. All right, it looks like most of the standards are kind of set. I don't see a whole lot more moving. So let's just kind of overall take a look at some of what we're seeing here as far as, again, big trends. Kindergarten, obviously no one touched this one, but there's not just a whole lot of change here. Big overall trends like you saw in 1st grade is there's a lot of separation now between plants and animals. So it's interesting that I think, yep, about the plants and animals are now in separate knowledge and skill areas, as well as different actual student expectations. And they've even split them out into different grade levels at some points. So I think the intent is to be able to focus on plants and then focus more on animals in different areas, make sure that they're getting equal treatment and showing how plants and animals are equal but different, I guess. I know in my own teaching, my teaching partner and I both realized at some point that we were really focusing on animals and hadn't necessarily spent as much due time on plants. And so that was something that we had decided and, kind of were able to look at our own instruction and see that we weren't doing as good a job on. And I think overall that may be kind of the trend, is that plants are being taught in a different way than animals. And so now they're making sure that there's an intentional focus on each. As far as you'll kind of see overall through elementary, there are some significant changes, but the material itself is not necessarily changing just a whole lot. It's where it's being taught, and it's to the level of rigor that it's being taught. But you can see the standards are staying pretty steady, right? There's not like these huge changes that you're going to see in middle school. There is an alignment for the most part. And we'll talk through each grade level specifically in a moment. Ooh, look at there, fossils coming all the way down to 3rd grade. That's going to be an interesting change. I think that one will be fun. Again, fourth grade, you're seeing more about the same number of standards. It's going to be how they're arranged, but it's not like adding a huge burden or difference between the grade levels. That changes once we get up a little bit into middle school. So middle school teachers, obviously there is a huge change in alignment on all of the standards, on all the reporting categories. And this is one of those places you're really, really, really going to see it. So if you notice, remember, green is the new TEKS, blue is the old TEKS. So starting in sixth grade, there's a lot more in sixth grade and eighth grade, because they're taking a lot of it out of seventh grade. And that's in an attempt to align, seventh grade is now going to be teaching more of all the other reporting categories, 1, 2, and 3. So they had to take something out so that there was time in that scope and sequence. So sixth grade teachers now get to teach, like, it used to be called levels of organization, variations, and starting cell theory. So that'll be fun for y'all. Seventh grade. Here, notice all of the blues like coming out. Like, this is now seventh grade teachers have had a whole lot taken out of their curriculum. You're no longer teaching cells. You're no longer teaching heredity. Lots and lots of stuff has been removed in order to make it more aligned and a better flow through all grade levels. Eighth grade, again, these are the blue. This is what you used to teach. This is what you're now going to teach. It's a little bit more, just a few more standards here and there. No problem, right? Eighth grade teachers now get to teach cell organelles. So that'll be a fun one to learn. And then going on through biology, you'll see that there's not necessarily a whole lot of new changes, new additions. There is a much better alignment under, starting in these lower grade levels. Sorry, thanks, Kat. Anyways, yeah, so again, bio, we were at bio. So in bio, you're not going to see huge changes, but there will be some small changes, and again, a lot of changes in rigor. So does anyone have any other comments about this alignment activity that you does this help to see how things line up a little bit? Awesome. Okay. So coming back to our slideshow, we do have a link to this activity. Yeah, it's a really great visual. Just like our kids, we really need to it helps to do a hands-on. We have this activity where you can actually print it out, and then you could physically move it around and like match them up as well. So if you're doing this with other members of your team, this is a really great alignment practice to be able to visualize and see how all of the standards are moving from one grade level to another. So this is the link to all the standards for this practice alignment, everything from all of the process skills that are now science and engineering practices through each reporting category. You will be getting a copy of this presentation as well as the slide deck today, and it has links to everything we've done this summer to help support teachers and staff as you're going through the change. So when you get this, you'll have links for everything, and this is just a really great way to visualize that. But looking at it in more depth, we're going to go ahead and take a really deep dive into each of the changes in grade level so that you can really see, this is going to be our explain piece, so you can really understand what is changing. Again, the big thing here is that it's all been recoded for a better alignment. So from kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade, anything 0.12 is basically your environments and ecosystems. Anything 0.13 is all about organisms and the changes and heredity and body systems and variations and all that kind of stuff. And then 7th grade only now has a 0.14. It is the only one with a 0.14, and that is going to be taxonomy. That is moving down from biology and a little bit up from 6th grade. So 7th grade now gets to teach taxonomy. There is a change in how the focus of the TEKS goes. So we're kind of focusing on how organisms and environments and ecosystems change over time. So this is going to be that recurring theme of scale and proportion. How is there a change over time, not only in organisms and in ecosystems, but also on the actual standards themselves? They've moved a lot of stuff around so that there is a clear learning progression. And it might involve just a couple of words or two. Like one grade level, they're going to describe it, and in the next grade level, they're going to describe and predict. Like, it's just a really focused learning progression. So that's kind of a change. Clearly in the past, especially middle school, there was like 6th grade and then 8th grade, and then 7th grade was like its own island in the middle. But even in the lower grades, there wasn't necessarily that specific focus on learning progression. So that'll be a nice change. Watch for verb changes, biology especially. You'll see a lot of the verbs have changed to make not only more rigorous, but also more measurable. So they've changed from just identify to describe and record kind of thing. So those verb changes are going to make our standards much more rigorous, but they also, I think, will help when you're looking to assess where your students are at. It'll help make it more measurable. And then a theme that you'll notice over and over again is, again, that plants and animals have been separated. So there's going to be a separate student expectation for plants and then one for animals. And it may be almost identical in every way, except it says plants and then animals. And so it's really specifically wanting you to teach whatever that, content is for looking at both plants and animals. And so you'll see these kind of themes, these overarching themes all throughout the new standards. Looking at kindergarten, and for each of the grade levels, we have a link to the side-by-side document. So this is EduSmart's side-by-side. This is what we came up with. This is 1st grade. I'm going to go ahead and pull down to the organisms in the environment. So you can see, again, the blue is the old TEKS, the green are the new TEKS. In this particular one, where it does do some explaining about where things are moving to. So like there's no new TEK for identify and compare the parts of plants because it's been moved to both kindergarten and 2nd grade. And so you can see how the standards are changing. So as we go through, there will be a link right here for each grade level. EduSmart has a great side-by-side. Lead Forward also has a great side-by-side. I will say, in preparation for this workshop, I've said this last week too, I looked at several different side-by-sides to really get an overview of how things are moving around. The TEA ones, love TEA, but it's a little difficult to understand just straight from them. So find multiple sources that are very clear and it will help you. Again, Lead Forward is great, and ours really show and highlight where the changes are. So for kindergarten, we're no longer teaching living and non-living anything. That has been moved to 1st grade. So instead, in that or the environment part, we're observing and identifying the dependence of plants on, and then it lists a bunch of things that plants depend on, like air and water. And then the second one is to identify the dependence of animals on, and then it lists all these other things. So again, there's that separation. You'll see it over and over and over again. The only thing that was taken out here is sorting plants and animals by their characteristics. That's kind of been moved a little bit. It's not even necessarily so specific in any of the standards. It's kind of just been built into other standards that they're doing that. We are identifying structures of plants, and now they've given you specific structures: roots, stems, leaves, fruits, and flowers. And in animals, they are also being much more specific. The structures of animals that help them with seeing and hearing and moving and grasping. So they have to know each of those, what parts of the animal do that. There's a big emphasis on structure and function. So later, after our break later, we'll talk about each of the, like some of the recurring themes that you're going to see and be able to really incorporate. And structure and function is huge. And they've changed the standards to really build it in and be very specific. Identify and record the life cycle of a plant. That's one of those verb changes to make it much more specific. And then identify how young plants, that's not really changing, how young plants resemble parent plants. First grade, not a bunch of huge changes. One good thing they did was replace the word offspring. Offspring is not a developmentally appropriate word for first graders. They just call them young now. So describe how parent plants, young plants or young animals resemble parents, instead of saying offspring. Another verb change: describe and record. You still have to do aquariums and terrariums, but the change is that we're really looking at the interactions and dependence. So that's kind of a big shift in, yes, offspring's a tough word for a first grader. But yeah, so it's reframing the intent of the standard to really look for dependence and interactions. This verb change actually kind of decreases the level of rigor a little bit because it's changing the focus. And then for the first time, you're introducing food chains. That's not different, but again, it's been reframed or focused to show we want this to be dependence. In a food chain, each animal depends on the level below it to for survival. So it's a building block towards interdependence. And that's where all of this is going with those point 12s, is it really is looking at the interdependence and the interconnectedness of ecosystems. So y'all are building that foundation by looking at dependence. In point 13, not huge changes, a little bit of change within life cycles. They wanted to clarify that these are simple life cycles in first grade. So you look at an example of a bird, a mammal, and a fish, no longer having to look at a frog, because a frog is a more complex life cycle. But they did delete parts of a plant. So yes, what you said earlier, first grade is really focusing on animals as opposed to plants. And then we focus more on plants in other grade levels. So yeah, sorry, that's not going to be as fun. But I do like that they simplified the bird, mammal, and fish. Grade 2, big changes in this first standard. Point 12 now says, describe how physical characteristics of environment, including rainfall, support plants and animals within an ecosystem. So the prior standard was all about how temperature and rainfall affect migration, hibernation, and dormancy. Those words are not used until later. Now it's just, how does an ecosystem overall support animals and plants? So you're looking more, it's more broad, but it can be an example of kind of any behavior or ecosystem. The level of rigor here for food chains has changed. It is now create their own food chains. And it specifically has to include producers and consumers, and they need to know those words, producer and consumer. So that's a big change. And then now second grade, that the plants have been moved out of first grade and put into second grade, explain how plants depend on other living things. So we're talking here about things like seed dispersal, how plants depend on some animals to move their seeds around, talking about pollination and how plants rely on bees to help pollinate, things like that. So how do plants depend on other living things? We're going to watch at the at the end, before we do breakouts, we're going to kind of go through some of the new standards and look at how do we teach these new standards, and that'll be one we look at in a little more detail. For the organisms breakout, so for point 13, now again, they've separated the standards for plants and animals. So you have two separate standards there. And then there's a brand new one here that says record and compare how being part of a group helps animals survive. So how does being part of a herd or being part of a school of fish help that animal survive? That is a brand new standard that has not ever been mentioned before. So that's going to be kind of fun, I think. And then we expand here. So first grade, we focus on simple life cycles. And now in second grade, you're moving to a more complex life cycles, talking all animals, not just insects. So that's kind of a change for that grade level. It is definitely an expansion as well. Third and fourth grade, again, you're going to see a change where we're focusing on animals in third grade and plants in fourth grade. So they're changing that alignment just a little bit. Here now you're going to see that migration, hibernation, and dormancy standard that moved from second grade. No real change in the flow of energy. They changed that C to, it used to be how do floods and droughts affects ecosystems, and now it's only reworded it a little bit to clarify that we are specifically looking at cause and effect. And so this is a really good place to bring in that recurring theme of cause and effect. And then we have in third and fourth grade now move down, identify fossil evidence of past living organisms. So looking at animals used to exist a really long time ago. Plants used to exist a really long time ago. They moved that down from fifth grade because the intent was to help students understand, like set that foundation that plants and animals have been around a really, really long time. But they've made it more specific now in that we are looking at fossils commonly found in Texas. So that wording is new. And this standard is almost identical in third and fourth grade, just to be able to use fossil evidence to know that things existed a really long time ago, and then look specifically at Texas. So that one really is a big change, considering how it's moved from fifth grade to both third and fourth. Looking at 13, again, because they've split animals into third grade and plants into fourth grade, the focus here is on the structure and function of animals. The specific examples are the neck of a giraffe and the webbed feet of a duck. So just some new examples for you to use. The life cycle one has changed because now it is explore, illustrate, and compare. So it's a little bit more specific, but here they chose to combine plants and animals. So we're looking at life cycles of things like beetles, crickets, radishes, and lima beans. So you're looking at different ways that different organisms grow. So that'll be a little more complex, I think, as well. Any comments so far on those younger grades? Moving on to fourth grade. Now here again, the focus is on plants. There's a big change as far as how we are teaching the flow of energy in a food web. The big change is now we're not only saying the flow of energy, but we're also saying the cycling of matter. So it's adding decomposers at the very start. So anytime from fourth grade on that you are talking about food webs or food chains, it's also going to be the cycling of matter and the flow of energy. So it's giving that full cycle now, like the brown food web, as well as the flow of energy from the sun. So that's probably a good change. maybe help our kids understand how important it is to have decomposing logs laying around in the forest and not pick them up and move them or whatever that involves, but it really does focus on that cycling of matter. So that is like matter and energy, that recurring theme. You'll see that over and over again starting in 4th grade. So we've changed the wording a little bit, changed that cycling of matter. One thing that did change here to make the alignment more consistent is that prediction piece. So the 4th grade standard used to say you have to be able to predict what is going to change in a food web, and that is no longer there. It's just describe. And then we're also adding in that fossils commonly found in Texas. As far as structures, now we're looking specifically at plants. So plant structures that help them survive. The examples here are waxy leaves and deep roots. And then a big change here is that they now have to differentiate between inherited and acquired physical traits. So they've taken out that behavioral traits and that's moved. And now here we're only looking at inherited and acquired physical traits. So this would be like someone dyeing their hair, right? Or giving one of the examples we use in our instruction module is a poodle being groomed to have little puffballs all over it. Like that's not how it looks naturally. It inherits the fur type that they have, but they acquire the physical appearance of poofballs. So pierced ears, bonsai trees, or landscaping, they don't grow that way. They are groomed and trimmed that way. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about acquired physical traits. I think it does help to build the foundation of inherited and acquired before we move on to behavioral traits, and maybe give them a better foundation on that. And then no more life cycles in 4th grade. That's all been moved down so that they should already have a really good foundation of life cycles. When we go up to 5th grade, one big change is now instead of saying living and non-living, we're just going to dive in with biotic and abiotic. So there's really I don't know why they wouldn't have done that. You have to teach them what living and non-living means anyways, so you might as well just give them the terminology. So that is probably a really positive change. That's really the only change in that one. We are adding that predict how changes in an ecosystem affect a food web. Y'all were doing that before anyways, so that's not a huge change, but it does now involve the cycling of matter and the flow of energy. So when we talk about cycling of matter, it's that, decomposers breaking down dead material and returning the nutrients and the energy to the food web. So we're making a distinction between cycling of matter and flow of energy. The other big change here is, and it's not a huge change, but we're now describing what a healthy ecosystem should look like and how human activity can be beneficial or harmful. So before it was kind of just like, what is an ecosystem? Now we're looking at what is a good ecosystem. And I really like how where the human activity can be beneficial or harmful, because we're looking at how, how we can take positive active steps to help minimize the impact of humans on our environment. And so you're looking at both good and bad for that. This is also where we deleted fossils. 5th grade, you don't have to teach fossils anymore. It's already been taken care of in 3rd and 4th grade. Moving to point 13, here's where we bring in the behavioral traits. There's not much difference in the other standard, structure and function of different species to identify how they survive in the same environment. The wording on that one is a little strange. So when it says the structure and function of different species to identify how organisms survive in the same environment, we're talking like, how foxes in the desert survive differently than foxes in the Arctic. So it's a little bit of an odd terminology, but it's really not much different than the standard you were teaching. It's a little more broad. gives you a little more flexibility, but it's really the same standard. The big change there is in B when we're looking at only instinctual behavioral traits versus learned behavioral traits. So instinctual traits like, a monkey clinging onto its mother versus learned traits, which would be, hunting in packs, the way making a successful hunt for a wolf or something along those lines. Not a huge difference, but the focus has changed from just inherited and acquired to behavioral traits specifically. So that's for elementary. Now, for our secondary teachers, deep breath, it's going to be okay. 6th and 8th grade, huge changes. Actually, 7th grade, huge changes. But it's a good change, especially for our biology teachers, I think, because it is a much better progression. It is a better aligned curriculum, and they've taken out some stuff that probably doesn't need to be taught anyways. So big realignment for sure. In 6-12, we are now, we moved from 8th grade where this is about competition, how organisms and populations compete for biotic and abiotic resources in an ecosystem. So how do trees compete for sunlight, as well as how organisms compete for food, like animals compete for food. So there's a lot to unpack in that standard. Not only are we talking about, parts of an ecosystem, now you got to get biotic and abiotic parts of an ecosystem, and then how both plants and animals compete for those resources. So again, a lot to unpack in that one little standard. Looking at B, this is a brand new standard. It's combining 2 standards, one from 8th grade and one from biology. So bio teachers, you'll see this is no longer something you have to teach. We're looking at all the different types of relationships between organisms. In 8th grade, it used to just be like predatory and competitive relationships. Now we're also adding symbiotic relationships, including mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. That's a lot of vocabulary for a 6th grader. So the concepts here are not necessarily super challenging. It's the vocabulary that you're going to struggle with, because it's some heavy duty stuff for a 12-year-old or 11-year-old. We are going to I'll show you a video what all of those different things mean. Yeah, we used to love teaching that parasitism and mutualism. That was such a fun one, and it's so great to have them finally see those relationships and all. So it is a great standard, but it's just going to be hard for that vocabulary. Looking at C, here's another big change. We don't teach Lou anymore. No more levels of organization. Like, it was so easy to say Lou and have that, make fun of it a little bit so the kids really remembered it. But we have changed that terminology from levels of organization to hierarchical organization. And I struggle with that word. I don't know why. Hierarchical organization. So that is more accurate terminology, building towards taxonomy, and for our bio teachers, it's actually the way that it should have been taught, as opposed to levels of organization. It's more specific terminology. It's just hard to say a little bit, and I liked Lou. So anyways, we're moving part of the levels of organization to 6th grade. So going from organism to population to a community, and all of that within an ecosystem. It used to be kind of like you could show it went organism, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere, but now we're looking at how all of those function within an ecosystem. So there's a little bit of a change there, but it's fairly significant. Yes. So I love Miss Paris. The Southern accent is going to come out on that one. Well, I live in East Texas, so we not only have the Southern accent, we also have a little bit of that Cajun influence from Louisiana. And some of my kids may struggle with that word. Hey, I don't know how that one's going to come out. So that's kind of a fun change. But again, it's just taking that the pieces of that levels of organization for 6th grade. And then we still teach part of that in 7th grade. 6th grade now is going to teach cell theory. I added this is my personal favorite resource for cell theory. It's a TED Talk. And it's called The Wacky History of Cell Theory. So I gave you that link because it's a really great way of teaching cell theory. But basically it is, it's the 3 parts of cell theory. It's kind of built into, yes, the best video ever for teaching cell theory. So it's kind of built into, all living things are made of cells. And then you go into comparing the basic characteristics of organisms, which include all living things are made of cells, 1 or more cells, right? So the unicellular versus multicellular, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. One interesting thing here is we no longer talk about modes of reproduction. That is no longer a characteristic of how you can sort organisms. So, so you don't have to talk about that anymore. That's probably a good thing. And then 6th grade no longer has to do kingdoms because all that taxonomy, all that, levels like that have been moved to 7th grade. However, you get an all new one with variations within a population that can be an advantage or a disadvantage as environments change over time. So this is the old variations from 7th grade, but it's really changing that focus again to look at the time scale. We want to look at changes over generations. And a generation for a moth could be very different from a generation for a human. So it's looking at how these things can help or hurt them in the environment over time, long periods of time. So get with your 7th grade peeps on that one because there's really great ways of teaching variations and looking at it in, real life examples, like the peppered moth example, and humans and their pinky toes and things like that. There's really great, relative examples for that, but we do want to extend it to look at it over time. So again, taxonomy is moved out of 6th grade, and abiotic and biotic, they should already know those terms now because we're introducing them in 5th grade. And the big change of levels of organization becoming hierarchical, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. I'm going to give up on that one. Organization instead of Lou. 7th grade. So good news first for the 7th grade teachers. First good news we've had in a while. Every week when we've done this, and every week as I've looked at all the standards and we're like, okay, this is coming to 7th grade and this is coming to 7th grade. It's like, holy cow, how can the 7th grade teachers fit it all in? Well, this is how. Some of the stuff has been completely deleted. Some of it has just been moved to other grade levels. We're really no longer talking about biomes. Biomes is kind of out the window. It's just talking overall about ecosystems and all the different types of ecosystems, but we don't specifically teach, deserts and arctics and tundras and all that stuff. Microhabitats has been moved to 8th grade. Biodiversity has been moved to 8th grade. Succession has also been moved to 8th grade. Sorry, 8th grade teachers. Dichotomous keys, we no longer teach dichotomous keys at all. Yay. They were really fun. I love to teach them, but they were somewhat impractical. So this has been removed to kind of reduce the scope and sequence entirely. Variation, 6th grade. Internal structures, oops, spelled that wrong. So we still teach about structure and function. It's just not necessarily done so specifically like it was. Organelles has been moved to 8th grade. They have completely taken out comparing cells to organ systems. just to reduce scope and sequence. Cell theory is 6th grade now. Internal and external stimuli has kind of been changed a little bit and moved to 8th grade. And then heredity and genetics is moved to 8th grade. So we've really streamlined what the 7th grade teachers are teaching as far as the actual topics, but it's all different from what you were teaching. So there's good news and bad news. The good news is there's less of it. The bad news is it's still basically all new. So for 12, you're still teaching trophic levels and energy pyramids. There's a little bit of change to the wording, but nothing like super significant. They've taken out like all the specific, like, you know, first order heterotrope, second order heterotrope, those kind of specific terms to just teach trophic levels and specified like why we're using energy pyramids. Like, what is the point of using the model of an energy pyramid? So that's really the big change there. A brand new standard is describing how ecosystems are sustained by the continuous flow of energy and cycling of matter. It's kind of what we taught with biodiversity a little bit, because you have to have that continuous flow of energy, but it's more specific as far as we're looking at sustainability and what happens when there's an interruption. It's kind of moved down from biology as far as that, looking at the overall well-being of an ecosystem. Body systems has not changed much at all. They did finally add the immune system. It was kind of silly to teach all those body systems and not teach the immune system. So now it's finally really in there. And we changed excretory back to urinary. Like, it used to be that before the 2017 streamline. Now it's back to being urinary. Had to teach it that way anyways because they used both terms, so not a big change. Lou has changed again to that funky word. And in 7th grade, all you have to teach is cells to organ systems. So they take organisms and up in 6th grade. Still teaching sexual and asexual reproduction, but it has changed a little bit to focus on the effects on the population over the long term, over generations. What is the effect of having asexual reproduction and cloning on the population over a long period of time? So it's just kind of extending it a little bit. And then natural and artificial selection, the terminology there has changed. So it's not selective breeding anymore, it's artificial selection. But the big change is that we're looking at over generations again. So it's extending the time period over many generations. But otherwise, it's not much different. And then, yay, all new. 7th grade gets to teach the taxonomic system. So here we go with taxonomy. Probably not, you know, it is what it is. There's some great mnemonics out there. We'll share some graphics with you here in a few minutes to help teach the taxonomic system, and then kingdoms. So that's the focus there, is how all of it is important to an ecosystem. Again, we looked at that fungi at the beginning. And so what is the benefit of having this, you know, like killer fungi in an ecosystem? What's the benefit of bacteria as far as decomposers? So it's looking at all the reasons, you know, and the benefits and the pieces and parts of the ecosystem as viewed through kingdoms. 8th grade, a lot of this is new. Obviously, a lot of it is moved from 7th grade up to 8th grade. There was not much life science taught in 8th grade. And what you did teach has pretty much been taken out. So competition in an ecosystem, that's moved down to 6th grade. And dependence on ocean systems has been really taken out of organisms in the environment and moved into earth and space. So it's still taught, it's just taught in a little bit different way. Otherwise, pretty much everything is new. You now get to teach disruptions such as population changes, natural disasters, and human intervention, and how they impact the transfer of energy in food webs. This is kind of coming down from bio, and it's much more specific. So we're looking at population changes, natural disasters, and human interventions. This is another one of those that really is going to have a lot to unpack. Like, it seems like a small little standard, but there's a whole lot going on in there because it's looking at how it impacts the transfer of energy in food webs in ecosystems. So this is where you're looking at if something happens to a particular species in an ecosystem and that's taken out, what's the impact? And they have to really figure out, you know, the effect on all the different parts of the food web. And how things are long reaching. And this would be a great place to bring in things like invasive species, and that would be a population change. And then, of course, human intervention. So there's just a lot to unpack in that one little standard. Succession, ecological succession has changed in that it's moved from both 7th grade and biology. So in 7th grade, you would only teach primary and secondary succession and kind of the path that succession takes. Now we're looking not only at primary and secondary, but how it's impacted from natural disasters, population and species diversity, and human activity. Again, a lot to unpack. That population and species diversity, like after a forest fire, you know, what are your species that are going to move in first? What happens to the diversity of species? And then how that changes over time as the ecosystem recovers. And then again, how that happens with natural disasters and human activity. So lots to unpack there. And then also new is biodiversity. And this works really well with that first one. Again, how does biodiversity contribute to stability and sustainability of an ecosystem? And this is new, the health of organisms within the ecosystem. Yeah, that one's just a lot. So it used to just, like in 7th grade, they would teach biodiversity as it contributes to sustainability. Here's a really good place to bring in that recurring theme and concept of stability and change. Like all of this standard is stability and change. So that one's going to be fun. Also new, moved from 7th grade, is organelles. And the focus is on the function of organelles. There's a really great 8th grade teachers, if you haven't heard it already, it's the cell wrap where it's cells, they're made of organelles. And it's a great way to teach cells. So I included that link because it gets stuck in your head and it's a fun one. They have added a couple of organelles as well, like ribosomes are now included. So there's a little bit more. Also now 8th grade is teaching heredity and genetics. So genes within chromosomes. That is how, you know, heredity is passed from generation to generation. And now you get to do the variation of traits within a population that lead to structural, behavioral, and physiological adaptations that influence the likelihood of survival and reproductive success over a species over generations. So this is where we had that in 7th grade. There was internal structures that would lead a population to survive, like hollow bones in a bird. And they've kind of combined that with variation of traits. Lots in this, but it kind of does build on, you know, what you're teaching here with ecosystems. It's just on an individual basis. So it would be easy to kind of just build within that overall, how do variations change in an individual and then in an ecosystem. So those will kind of work together. Last but not least, our biology. Again, there's small changes throughout all the standards, but it's not a huge change overall, except for the verbs. Watch for verb changes because they have really increased the rigor in a lot of places. I do think the alignment will help you. So it's going to be a struggle for all of our teachers, kindergarten and up, to really get that alignment right. But once they get to high school, it's going to make a huge difference in what they come to you already knowing and understanding, especially that interdependence and how everything within an ecosystem works together and builds together. Succession, taxonomy, and variation and adaptations has all been taken out and moved down. So that's no longer anything you have to teach. There is one new standard for biology. And actually, it's not exactly new. This was taken out in the streamlining in 2017. So it was included in the standards before then, and then they took it out when they streamlined, and now they're adding it back. And this is discuss the importance of molecular technology such as, and then it goes into a whole bunch of really big words. So, you know, gel, and it's a very in-depth standard. And then it's there because we wanted to add real world application of molecular technology. So why is this important? This is a great place to bring in engineering design challenges. And I'll show you that in a moment as far as how that can look in the classroom to, you know, get the kids thinking in real world terms for these kinds of advanced technologies. So yeah, so that's kind of like an overview of all the big changes. Anybody have any questions on particular grade levels of the standards and kind of how we've gone through them? Again, I'm going to go back really quick to this overview. So again, you can kind of see how they've realigned them. The alignment is just more clean. It focuses, a lot of them focus on changes over time. Lots more verb changes, and then the separation for plants and animals within the younger elementary grades specifically. We had a question in the chat about the biology taxonomy, and this is just, I was just showing you that there is no correlation to the new standards for taxonomy, so y'all really are off the hook for that in biology. I did put a link in the chat to the attendance check. So that's how you get credit for your 3 hours of CTE, you know, continuing education credits. So please do fill out the attendance check. It's a short Google form. We really appreciate your feedback. It kind of guides how we go forward thinking about webinars and any kind of PD that we do in the future. So definitely fill out that attendance check. So now, as we get going back, we're going to be talking about, we are going to go to breakout rooms soon so that you'll be able to work with your grade level peeps to like share ideas and kind of talk through some of these changes. All right. So as we are looking at these new standards and thinking through the new standards, of course, the recurring themes and content is kind of like the overarching themes that you can build into each. There are easy ways to connect every single one of the RTCs to any standard within here. We did an entire presentation, a whole webinar or workshop on the recurring themes and concepts. So if you're not familiar with them yet, this is a really good way to start building up to the new standards. Like you can start incorporating these recurring themes now. And then by the time you actually have to do the new content, it's going to help a lot that you're already comfortable with the recurring themes. That said, even though you can connect any of the 7 recurring themes to this content, there's some that fit better than others. So clearly, structure and function is built into the standards. Like it literally says in half of the standards, look at the structure of animals, look at the structure of plants, look at the structure of a cell, function of a cell, that kind of thing. So structure and function should be one of the big recurring themes that you use throughout organisms in the environment. Cause and effect, that is that, you know, relationship in what happens, why do animals change, like have variations, what causes them, like The peppered moth is a great example. If you're not familiar with peppered moth, it's in the 1800s, this species of moth blended in really well with these white trees near London, and then industrialization hit and the trees turned black from soot. And almost immediately the peppered moths started changing their to a darker species because they had those natural variations already. And because of predation, the darker moths survived longer. And there's this direct cause and effect relationship between the changing of the color of the trees to the changing of the color of the moths. So that cause and effect relationship, we're talking, anything to do with food webs and food chains, the disruption in ecosystems, floods and droughts, all of that stuff is a cause and effect relationship. So that's easily built in to how you can frame the learning on organisms in the environment. Matter and energy, we're obviously talking about energy flow and matter cycling. Those two things, it's like an infinity sign, the way I think of it. When we're talking about the way the energy flows, of course, energy comes from the sun and it flows through a food web, and then decomposers then take the matter and break down the matter and return the nutrients and everything to the soil. That energy is just moved throughout the system. So the flow of matter and the flow of energy are very interconnected, and they've kind of taken them and separated them a little bit, but it really is the same kind of process. So that's, all ecosystems use the flow of energy. And then stability and change, this is a great place to build this in. This one's harder to fit in some other places, like sure, weathering and erosion and deposition is all about stability and change. But there's a lot of connections here in how ecosystems change because of outside influence. So an invasive species, human activity, something changes in the ecosystem and the impact of that, how it destabilizes very quickly. Overarching or overflowing all of these, I'm sorry, I did list some specific examples for each of those four recurring themes and concepts, where you can fit in structure and function. Like for this one, especially, just read the TEAC. It's there on all of the standards pretty much. For stability and change, ecological succession is a great one. For biology teachers, homeostasis is a great example of stability and change. When something, bumps your homeostasis and all of a sudden now you have a fever or, whatever it happens to be. That's a great example of stability and change. Matter and energy is all that cycling of matter and all those symbiotic or interrelationships between organisms. And cause and effect, again, how ecosystems can change because of how something affects it. Overarching all of that is really this scale, proportion, and quantity recurring theme, because we talked in the beginning, a lot of the standards have changed to include how organisms or how ecosystems change over many generations, how this change over time. So that's that scale piece. Obviously, we're talking about systems, so that one can be incorporated in a lot of ways. There's a lot of patterns you could bring in, but those four recurring themes in the context of scale are really going to help push your learning. So if we connect those themes very explicitly, remember, we kind of think, it's easy to see this cause and effect relationship or this structure and function relationship, but we want to be very explicit and show that relationship for our students. When we're talking about recurring themes, it's really pointing out to them, this is where you can scaffold your learning on. And especially as we change to the new standards in that 3D teaching, it's going to be important to be very explicit in how you connect the recurring themes. Again, we have the link to all the side-by-side documents. So it was on each page, but it's also like, here's all of them in one folder. So you have access to that. Feel free to share these with any of your colleagues. These are freebies that we are, you can send to anyone you want, whether they're a customer or not. We also have a one-pager for recurring themes and concepts. So this is a great like anchor chart that you could put up in your room. And it shows that all those recurring themes and patterns. And then we're going to take a little bit of a look at some of these new standards. So this isn't going to cover all of them. I am going to be using EduSmart resources to show how you might want to teach this new standard. If you're not an EduSmart customer, it still gives you a really good example of ways that you can start incorporating, or kind of ways that that the standard is looking for, what our students need to know. And if you are an EduSmart customer already, of course, these are great examples of content that you can use already. So to start with, animals living in groups. So it's not a huge shift in, like this was a behavior that animals exhibited already. It's not going to be the anchor chart and side-by-sides and all of that are going to be in this slide deck when you get this. So just for being here, we're going to send out all of this information to you, and it's just within the slide deck. There are these are links. So this is a link to the one pager. These are links to the side-by-sides. So you're automatically getting a link to all of it. And it's a great little, I had fun creating this. This is a great little anchor chart to be able to help your kids. And one suggestion we had from a teacher when we were doing recurring themes is to help your students. You could actually put one of those little arrow sticky notes and point at the exact recurring theme that you are hooking on. So I thought that was a great idea. Let's point it out in a very visual format for our kids. Hey, we want to look at this as a cause and effect relationship. Hey, we want to look at this as energy and matter. It never hurts to have it visual. And so stick it up on the wall and point an arrow at it so your kids can help make those connections. Well, I thought that was a fabulous idea. All right, so yeah, you're getting all of those freebies, and you're welcome to, again, share as much as you would like with anyone who it might help. So looking at animals living in groups, we always try, EduSmart, we try and be very intentional about how we, need to log back in here, how we incorporate literacy into science, and this particular standard is a great way of doing that. So I'm going to navigate to organisms and the environment. You can see each of the standards has their own tile, and here's animals living in groups. The instruction module talks about meerkats and the advantages of meerkats who live in a group, and some of them can keep watch, and some of them can go get food, and some of them watch over the young, and how they live this very cooperative lifestyle. In the reader, it was really, I love the way they introduced this. So this is just a simple reader talking about a tough day at school, and this poor little girl comes home because she got in a fight with all of her friends, and so she says, I don't need friends at all. And her aunt says, yes, she does. And they end up looking out at the bird feeder outside, and they watch as birds work in cooperative groups to help each other get food. One of them will land and kind of knock a bunch of seeds on, and then the rest of them would be at the bottom. And the more it shows a correlation between, the more birds of that species that came, the longer they were able to sit and feed, because they had birds looking out for predators. So a simple reader about the benefits of working in a group, living in a group. It was a great way to incorporate it. It doesn't, they need to know the benefits. We can point those out to them, but a lot of them are pretty well, understood in a lot of ways, and it's something we can easily relate to as humans. Humans rely on each other. We need each other. We work together to get things done. You've got your standard right there. So this is a great one to incorporate literacy. Oops, I didn't change the title on that, but this one with acquired and inherited traits. Apparently I did not also change the, hang on, I'm sorry. This is a 4th grade standard. And go back to my content library. I'm going to navigate to 4th grade, organisms and the environment. So the big change here is that we're looking at these acquired physical traits, and that's not really been addressed before. So I'm going to make sure I'm still sharing, and then we're going to watch just a little bit of the instruction module to show how we can teach this.
At the dog show, Jamie's poodle Happy is stealing all the attention. But Happy was not born looking like this. In fact, poodles are born with fur of equal length all over their bodies. Happy's fur was shaped like the other pets for the show. While the growth of a dog's fur is a trait passed on to puppies, the shape of the fur is not. What are traits that are passed on to the next generation called?
So if you're familiar with EduSmart, of course, we have these built-in pauses within the instruction module. So you could have that class conversation here. We're going to, maybe have a think, pair, share or shoulder partners or whatever it is to, really get them talking and collaborating and discussing, and then we'll move on.
Traits like fur and its color are examples of inherited physical traits. Traits that are not passed on are called acquired physical traits. Such changes happen during the life of an organism, not when they are born. Which of these are inherited physical traits and which are acquired physical traits?
So again, you have that prompt, and it's going to give you that discussion to have that opportunity to have a discussion within your class. I love this picture. It just is a happy picture all the way around.
The height an organism reaches is an inherited physical trait, like color. How tall an organism grows depends on the parents. But the dyeing of hair and shaping of the trees are both acquired physical traits. Why are they considered acquired physical traits? They are acquired physical traits because both are changes acquired during the life of an organism and cannot be passed on to the next generation. In plants, shaping trees to look small in the art of bonsai is also an acquired physical trait. Acquired physical traits can be temporary, like calluses, or permanent, like pierced ears, because of external influence. How many more acquired physical traits can you think of?
I can just hear that discussion piece in my classroom too, where they're just, if you could start with some kind of chart and have them calling out those different physical traits, that could take a while. And then it goes into the summary. So it's really just pointing out, things that change within organisms during their lifetime. So that's a great little introduction to acquired traits. And then again, from there, they build into acquired behavioral traits. So I think that really does give them a better foundation for what acquired means. They've had more exposure to it in the past because that, the difference between acquired behavior and inherited behavior traits is a little more challenging for them. This is coming again from both 8th grade and from biology, and it's going down to 6th grade. So we're going to watch parts of the instruction module because it's really expanded what all these different relationships are. But again, the vocabulary on this is really tough for our students. There's just a lot of it. And knowing those differences. Come on. Sorry, my internet connection's a little slow.
While most birds wouldn't choose a cactus to build their nests in, that's exactly what the cactus wren does. The prickly spines of the saguaro protect the cactus wren's fledglings from predators such as rattlesnakes. The cactus wren is one of the many organisms that live in the Sonoran Desert ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a community of living and non-living components interacting with each other in a geographic area. The living components of an ecosystem are known as biotic factors, whereas the non-living components are known as abiotic factors. These factors interact with each other in different ways for different reasons such as food and shelter. You saw the cactus wren interacting with the saguaro cactus for its shelter. What's another example of organisms interacting for shelter? In a marine ecosystem, the clownfish seeks shelter from its predators amidst the sea anemone's tentacles. Organisms also depend on each other for food. This connects them to each other in what is called a food chain. A series of overlapping food chains that exist in an ecosystem creates a food web. The food web shows how energy and nutrients flow between organisms in an ecosystem. In this terrestrial food web, rabbits, grasshoppers, and deer eat only plants. They are herbivores and form a consumer-producer relationship with the plants. What consumer-producer relationships can you spot in this marine food web? Zooplankton and phytoplankton represent a consumer-producer relationship in this marine food web. Another type of relationship between some organisms in a food web is the predator-prey relationship. In this terrestrial food web, the wolf hunts rabbits. The wolf, which is a carnivore, is known as the predator and the rabbit is its prey. A predator-prey relationship is nature's mechanism for keeping an ecosystem in balance. What interrelationship do you observe here? The trees compete for sunlight. Taller trees get more sunlight for photosynthesis. This relationship is known as competition. Similarly, many animals too compete for territory, food, or mates. Unlike competition, commensalism is when one organism benefits while the other is neither harmed nor benefited. Clownfish find protection among the stinging tentacles of sea anemone. The sea anemone itself is neither harmed nor benefited. Barnacles on whales is another example of commensalism. The barnacles get access to fresh water as the whale travels. The whales themselves are not affected. A parasite-host relationship is another kind of interaction between two organisms. Tapeworms are parasites that live in the intestines of some mammals called their hosts. They get their energy by absorbing food from their hosts. Plants can also be part of a parasite-host relationship. The daughter parasite lacks chlorophyll and can't make its own food. Instead, it has yellow or orange thread-like structures that attach themselves to a green plant to absorb its nutrients. How would you compare parasites and predators? A parasite is similar to a predator. It depends on other living organisms for food. While a predator kills, a parasite causes harm. An interrelation where both organisms are benefited is mutualism. The oxpecker gets its food by eating the parasites on the buffalo, which benefits the buffalo. In commensalism, parasitism, and mutualism, two organisms interact in different ways without competing. They are symbiotic relationships or symbiosis.
All right, so a couple of things to point out on that particular instruction module is it's taking each of the terminologies and applying it both to plants and animals. And then it's building on the relationship slowly over time. I also like the way it goes back to review biotic and abiotic, as well as, you know, interactions within a food web. So it shows how each of the pieces of everything that we're learning from kindergarten and up kind of culminates in this explanation of all the different types of relationships. And so it's a really good way to kind of build up to that. In taxonomy, of course, there is a lot to teach within this standard. My daughter is the one, she's like, oh, I love taxonomy. And then she gave me this great little mnemonic device. King Philip came over from Great Spain. So I'm sure our bio teachers and sixth grade would have like some other really great ideas for this. But, you know, there's, of course, tons of activities within EduSmart as well on all of these different types of taxonomy, but it's not super overwhelming necessarily. One of the focuses of this standard is that it needs to be on the characteristics, so how those characteristics compare and the benefit of them, of each of the different kingdoms, and all to like an ecosystem, how it overall functions. Finally, on our the new standard for biology, again, this is an application of different types of molecular technologies. So I'm gonna show you. Actually, I'm gonna go to the teacher version of this engineering design challenge. So let me go to biology, that's genetics, and applied genetics. So in this engineering design challenges, the students are doing research on genome editing technologies. And the teacher version has a list of all the different standards, but here's where it's like discuss the importance of molecular technologies, and then it goes into all those really big words like genetic engineering, and how they're used in current research and engineering practices. So this is a great way to build engineering into a biology class. Sometimes if that's maybe a little bit more challenging is to get in those engineering practices. This is going to be a great way to research, to apply it to current trends in science and what's going on in actual science these days, and really get your students talking and thinking about, is this good, is this bad, is this helpful, whatever it happens to be. So this is an engineering design challenge like based around that research of understanding current molecular technology. All of those links are included in, like, all of these are links. I'll correct that one link for you. But all of these are links to these activities or instruction modules to kind of give you just a head start on some of the brand new standards that we have, things that we haven't taught before at all. So are there any questions on recurring themes or any of the ways that we can like incorporate the new standards into what we're teaching now, or how we can address those new standards? All right, so let's head in for a share-a-thon. I'm going to open up breakout rooms, and you may choose which room you would like to go to. So whether elementary or secondary is more your style. This is a great time, like what it says here, our TEKs are changing, but our lessons are still awesome. With organisms in the environment, more so than any, we really need to share. Like, you have great lessons that teach cells, cell theory, like the wacky history of cell theory, all of that kind of stuff. We have those. We have great ideas, but your grade level peeps are going to need to help in where these are moving to. So I will put the link to to the vertical alignment in the chat so you can kind of have something to base your discussion off of. But this is a really great chance for you to share activities, ideas, ways of teaching, things that have helped you or that you have perfected over the years with people who are about to have to start teaching brand new concepts. So please, have that discussion, share. We'll come back in about 30 minutes to like recap and, get a couple of good takeaways. And then, yeah, I get, so the comment is the biggest concern is in application and scope and sequence. And yeah, that one's tough because the new standards really are about how do we apply this. A lot of the science and engineering practices are about how do you do the science, not just how do we learn about it, but it's, it's taking those scientific practices and then applying them to solutions, which is the engineering part. So it is a challenge. There's no question. It is absolutely a challenge. So this is a great chance to talk to other biology teachers about it too. All right, awesome. So it seems like there was some really great discussion going on about the beginning of the year and how, sorry, didn't mean to cut anybody off. And then also how, the TEKS are going to be applied and like some of those process skills that we've been looking at, that we've currently been teaching, and how they're transitioning to both engineering skills as well as experimental design skills. So kind of just based off your discussion and looking at these reflection questions, what do you feel is going to be the biggest challenge? What do you think is going to be the biggest struggle for both us as instructors as well as our students?
Well, one of the things they seem to be looking for is a lot more hands-on activities. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, because I have a better background in physical science, it's easier for me to do that with the physics, chemistry type units mm-hmm. than it is in the life science and earth science units. And that's where I'd like more ideas on how to make them more hands-on, more interactive. Mm-hmm. Especially because like I was looking at, I was like, well, maybe I can work in dissection in 6th grade, but I really don't see where that's going to work well with my TEKS in 6th grade. It wouldn't be 7th grade.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
I can do some microscope labs, but I mean, it's limited on the hands-on, and yet they seem that that's a big emphasis.
Well, we introduced, especially with dissections and stuff like that, in my school, and it's can easily translate for 6th grade, and it hits more on those lab skills and teaching them the principles of like planes on the body and dissection and where you're looking at. It's a gummy bear dissection. So you can get a series of those.
I've seen that. Okay.
Yeah. So gummy bear dissection is a really great way to take that in, and then you're incorporating again those basic TEKS that you need for your
stretched it before. I did the earthworm one year, and we went through and we did the taxonomy of the earthworm, and then we talked about sexual versus asexual and how earthworm, and stuff like that. I mean, I stretched it, believe me.
Yeah.
But it seems like the stretch might be getting even bigger.
Well, that's like I know when we were dealing with dichotomous keys, one of the things that we were getting into and struggling with is that, structure and function. And so we would do random labs and like activities and warm-ups where we were giving kids simple things such as a picture of a sneaker or a picture of a pencil and start describing structures and functions and get them mm-hmm. thinking about those things at the very beginning of the year. So just think about where you're going to be using elements like that,
okay,
and stuff like that to incorporate into, and just use it more like the beginning of the year. If you have that window, I don't know how yours, this is why I said scope and sequence is such a huge thing, because I know we talked about it in our group. In middle school, there's so many different TEKS, and it covers all the different areas between earth science, life sciences, and physical sciences. that sometimes trying to mash it all in there and have enough room to build in and really progress and check and reteach as needed is not always in there. So sometimes finding a small window for those foundational pieces with something so simple as like describe structure and function of a pencil, and really break it down, because the kids, it's a pencil, it's for writing. All right, okay, what else does it do? Let's talk about this little section over here and just point to it. What's this? And get their brains thinking on that level, and then make the connection to something else, like a frog. What, frogs, what structure and functions? Frogs have a tongue. What is the purpose and the function of the tongue, in that way? Webbed feet, and then that plays into that whole part when you're moving into adaptations. And they go, oh yeah, remember? So I'm such a kinesthetic learner myself, especially with my ADHD. I connect so much with my kids, and I'm still in that window. I've only been teaching for like 5 years. So I'm like, what kind of crazy stuff can I bring to the table?
Oh, no, I'm that way too. I'm even looking at, like, I've always drawn a lot of my notes, but I'm looking at even drawing more of them this year and trying to work more ways of getting creative with that, because I do much better if I draw things and I play with things. And
right. So it's like we do wound labs. So then my kids, we use toilet paper, found like all dollar store items, and they create like a cut on their arm. And we use that to study integumentary system. And we talk about the correlation. What layer of the skin does it need to reach if we're going to have blood present? Then we talk about nervous system. What do you feel? Where does that come from? What system is that? And so we make those connections with the body systems when we do those activities. So
that's good. I like that.
Yeah. Drawing is far superior. Visuals.
It is. So I've always done it. Now my kids sometimes laugh at me because, like, my airplane, that they've accused me of making it look like a whale, a flying whale. But I'm like, it's okay. I know it's an airplane.
Your doodle notes are awesome, and a lot of the sixth grade.
I use a lot of doodle notes.
Yeah. A lot of the sixth grade standards, I think, are going to be great for drawing your notes like that. I mean, especially when you're talking about what used to be levels of organization and all that. I mean, the more you can show, and like the relationships, when you can start building like concept maps and showing the relationships and how they might overlap and stuff, that's going to be awesome. I mean, that's going to be so visual and so kinetic for the kids to be able to do stuff like that. I think there are places you'll be able to work in those types of labs, those types of models even.
One of the things that I want to do with fifth grade is with structures and function is kind of go a little bit beyond, is have the students select an object like a pencil sharpener and doorknob. And I want them to illustrate what's on the inside of those objects that's making, what was the function of it. I'm thinking maybe like a big soda machine, a vending machine, maybe something simple like a mechanical pencil sharpener, a doorknob. Let's draw it and let's think about what's on the inside of this, cause it, what's the function of the parts that's working.
Oh, no, that's good. I've done that before. Those push and go toys.
Yes.
I've had the kids take some of those apart so that they can see how they actually work and, the different pieces and parts of it work.
And have them illustrate it and draw it also in their journal. So I want them to do some thinking first.
They did a lot of drawing, yep.
Yes, what's in that doorknob that sets the purpose of what's in that pencil sharpener? What are the gears doing in a hair dryer, parts of a hair dryer? What causes the heat to flow from the hair dryer? So that's a great idea too.
But it's great if you have things that you can take them apart, which is why I use the push and go toys, because I could have a set that they didn't take apart. And then I had a set that we just took apart and put back together all the time. So, but they could actually see, the motion of the different forces and the movement of the gears and all that stuff, and draw that as they were explaining how it would actually work.
And you could use items as simple as like those tiny little dollar store flashlights or a mechanical pencil, and have them take things like that apart too, that are so cheap and real simple. even like little plastic water guns and things like that. So then they're looking at the mechanics of it and seeing where the pieces go together so you can address
Yeah,
that.
it helps if you have cheap things. Now, unfortunately,
Yes.
when I did it, I didn't have the cheaper ones. You can buy the cheaper ones, but I bought the bigger ones because it was easier for the kids to see what was actually happening in the bigger toys. So they
Sounds
were more
great.
expensive.
Thank you.
Those are all just amazing ideas. I love the way to connect that structure and function, especially so do something simple and then build up to something complex like an organism or an ecosystem where you're looking at the structure and function, and they can really, you know, get that foundation and really understand how the pieces fit together. So thank you all for sharing, because those are really, really great ideas. So some main takeaways, hopefully today we got that, yeah, there's a major realignment, obviously. But in a lot of ways we're trying, I think the standards are really trying to streamline as far as progressing better from grade level to grade level. How much that actually happened will is yet to be seen. But we'll you know, this particular reporting category really feeds well into the recurring themes. Maybe not quite as well, I mean it does, but into those science and engineering practices, of course, that's just kind of the basis for how we do all science. So it will I think we'll work those into as well. But a lot of the recurring themes will be easy for us to start implementing this year, even if you're not completely implementing the new content. The other thing we want to just remind you, we are still, we've rescheduled the reporting category 2. That's now going to be Monday. So Monday, July 31st, 9 a.m. to 12. The link is included in, if you were registered for the session before, you are automatically registered for the session now. So hopefully we'll see you on Monday for that last session. Also, I want to invite you, and this one is for you, Mr. Yeager. We are going to, you know, EduSmart does a webinar series throughout the year. Every other week we do a webinar on some kind of teaching topic. We're going to start with our back to school webinar to show how to actually work within EduSmart. So we have a new interface. The content's still the same, but the interface is different. It's going to be very much more simple to use, very visual for those of us who are visual learners. So I've been watching our comments on the feedback form, and a lot of people are asking for more information on how to actually navigate and stuff. So that's going to be our very first webinar on August 24th. It's after school. It will be recorded. You'll be getting an invitation soon. Other than that, if you're new to EduSmart, if you're not a customer yet, you can get a free trial if you are interested. Just go to our website. All the links, this is a link, just go to the website and you can get a free trial. And then there are links to all of the resources that we've shared. And that includes all the other sessions that we've done this summer. So starting with anchoring phenomenon, the recurring themes, the science and engineering practices, and 3D learning, that was all in June. The 2 that we've done so far for July. And then all of those links. So here's, someone asked earlier, here's a link to your side-by-side, that anchor chart. We offer, there's a 3D lesson plan to kind of help you start getting used to how to think through making your lessons 3D. Links to all of that, they're all freebies. You're free to share them with anyone you like. So those are all available for you as well. And then there's a link to that awesome Mr. Anderson. We love Mr. Anderson. Anchoring phenomenon for pretty much all of your content topics. We will be emailing out a recording of this session as well as the slide deck. So you'll be receiving that probably in a couple of days. You should have okay, sorry, let me address some of the questions in the chat. Happy Little Airplane is like my favorite now, so I'll be drawing happy airplanes from now on. Yes. So if you were not registered for the session, you can still register. When you get the link for this session right here, you'll be able to, there's a link to the registration on that page. It says, the summer series. Here's the link to the registration right here. So just click on that and you'll sign in just like you did for today. I do appreciate everyone sharing those fabulous ideas. I got some great ideas from that. It will be, those are, you know, if we stick together like teachers always do, we'll be able to get through this just fine. The recording for this session will be shared and we will email it to you soon. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here today. This was a really great session. Thank you for being so interactive and so much chatting. I appreciate that a lot. It makes it so much more fun. And otherwise, enjoy what's left of your summer. Have fun. Go out, get some sun while you can. And we'll see you all on Monday. Thank you so much.